5 minutes before my boss's entire world began to crumble. He laughed in my face and said, "Look at that. The broke girl thinks she can taste wine." My name is Daisy Caldwell, and for the past 3 years I have worked under Grant Maxwell, a man who speaks like every sentence is a spotlight, and everyone else is standing in the dark. I had heard him say worse, but that afternoon his voice carried farther than usual. People actually turned to look at me. He wanted them to. I did not say a word. Grant smirked like my silence proved him right. "Careful, Daisy. Some bottles cost more than your car," he added, eyes flicking over me as if he were assessing a thrift store item someone accidentally brought to a luxury event. One of the investors chuckled politely. Another pretended not to hear a thing. Inside my chest, something tightened, old, familiar, but I held it still. Grant did not know I had been bartending since I was 19, or that I studied enology at night while working 2 jobs. He did not know I had a quiet savings account, or that I had built it specifically for moments when men like him believed I could not possibly exist outside the box they built for me. When the bidding started for the 50-year-old French vintage, Grant stepped forward like a king reclaiming a throne. "This one is mine," he bragged to the cluster around him. "Perfect for our expansion deal. You will see." I waited, 1 minute, then 2. The auctioneer called numbers that made people suck in their breath, but Grant kept bidding, swaggering on fumes of ego and borrowed confidence. And then, at exactly the 5-minute mark, I lifted my paddle. The room froze. Grant's jaw worked like he was trying to swallow something sharp. Someone whispered my name as though they were unsure I should have one. I did not look at Grant. I did not need to. The bottle was declared mine moments later. Everyone thought that was the shock. But the real blow, the one Grant never saw coming, was already waiting for him in the envelope I had left behind. The story you are about to hear is a fictional work created by the writing team at Revenge AITA. Each narrative explores a different emotional truth, a different turning point, and a different reckoning. No 2 stories share the same message, and none repeat the arc of another. What unfolds next belongs entirely to Daisy, and to the consequences her silence set in motion. Grant's expression was still stuck between confusion and disbelief as I stepped away, leaving the crowd buzzing and my pulse steady. The moment felt less like a victory and more like a door unlocking after years of pressure. Whatever happened next would rise from everything that led me here, and Chapter 2 begins where those years first began to shape me. People at Maxwell and Reinhardt Wines liked to pretend they did not see the way Grant spoke to me. They heard him. They always heard him. But they learned to look past it the same way he expected me to. "Daisy, triple-check the shipment report," he would say, even when he knew I had already done it twice. Or, "Do not speak yet, Daisy. Let the senior team handle this." The senior team meant him. I used to nod and step back because pushing forward only made him sharper. The first week I worked there, he corrected my pronunciation of a French region I had studied for months. "You said it wrong," he insisted. When another analyst gently told him I was right, he brushed it off. Well, she did not sound right. That was how Grant worked if I was correct. He still found a way to make me smaller. Eleanor from accounting once whispered to me, "You should speak more in meetings." Before I could answer, Grant cut across the room. "Daisy speaks when there is something worth adding." I felt Eleanor shrink beside me, even though the comment was meant for me. There was one afternoon when the company nearly lost a deal worth several $1,000,000. A distributor's numbers looked clean at first glance, but I noticed gaps, dates that did not line up, totals that tipped too perfectly. I stayed late, running the math 3 times. The next morning, I handed Grant the corrected projection. "If we move forward with this contract, we will lose money," I told him. He skimmed the report, nodded once, then walked straight into the boardroom. "I caught an error," he announced. "Saved us from a disaster." His eyes slid toward me for half a second. No one else looked to see whether I had written the entire thing by hand the night before. I spent years studying enology at night and pouring drinks in small bars to pay for the courses. But inside that company, I was still the quiet girl who helped and never led. I used to wonder how long a person could swallow disrespect before something finally broke. Looking back, the break had already started. I just had not named it yet. When I arrived at the Napa Wine Exchange that afternoon, the first person who spoke to me did not even ask my name. "Miss, can you wipe these glasses?" a server said, pressing a cloth into my hand. Before I could answer, Grant walked by and laughed. "Do not worry," he told the server. "She is used to taking care of the small jobs." I set the cloth down slowly. The server flushed and murmured an apology. Grant did not. A pair of investors approached him a moment later. "Grant, we did not know Daisy would be here," he shrugged. "Someone must have felt sorry for her. Maybe they had an extra seat." I heard every word. One of the investors looked at me with the same expression people use when they tip a jar. They assume I live off. Grant steered them toward the display table, putting on his performance voice. "This region," he declared, tapping the label on a bottle, "is known for heavy oak and a full-bodied finish." He was completely wrong. The region he named was famous for light, mineral-driven wines. Anyone who had spent even a month studying enology knew that. But the investors nodded politely, unwilling to correct him. I stayed close enough to hear him, but far enough to keep my face calm. Grant looked restless, too eager, too sharp around the edges. His laugh was louder than usual, his hands moving non-stop, as if selling himself mattered more than selling the brand. When one of the donors asked him whether the company planned to expand its European partnerships, he stumbled through an answer, then masked it with bravado. "After I win the French vintage tonight," he said, "our leverage will be unquestionable." I watched him over the rim of my glass, taking in the cracks he thought no one noticed. His desperation clung to every word, every exaggerated gesture, every lie he told with a smile. I started to understand that Grant did not just want the vintage. He needed it. And whatever he needed it for was far bigger than pride. I found out the truth 2 weeks before the auction, on a night when the office was nearly empty, and the only sound was the hum of the old printer Grant insisted on keeping. I had stayed late to finish a quarterly analysis when I noticed a set of reimbursement forms sitting on the shared drive forms Grant had never mentioned to me. The numbers felt wrong immediately. The amounts were too round, the justifications too vague. When I opened the attached receipts, my stomach tightened. They were tied to overseas meetings we never had. They referenced distributors we had not spoken to in over a year. And then I saw a line item labeled gift investment, with a projected value equal to the estimated price of the 50-year-old French vintage. The office door opened behind me. Grant stepped in, pretending surprise, burning the midnight oil. "Daisy, good. Someone has to make the numbers look clean." I closed the tab before he reached my desk. "Are these reimbursements finalized?" He waved a hand. "Just routine expenses. Nothing you need to worry about." His tone was light, but his eyes stayed locked on me. Later that night, when I reopened the files, everything clicked. He was using company funds to bribe an overseas distributor. The bottle was not just a luxury, it was leverage. And he had used my previous financial reports rewritten, altered, twisted to justify the purchase. I printed every document and slipped them into a folder I kept hidden at home. After years of keeping my head down, something inside me refused to bend anymore. I contacted a law office in San Francisco and handed them everything. They took the case within days. Back at the auction, watching Grant's forced confidence unravel, I felt the quiet shift inside me again. He had built his entire empire on forged numbers, altered documents, and other people's work. And numbers, no matter how carefully manipulated, always lead somewhere. When the auctioneer struck the gavel to begin, Grant moved forward as if the entire room existed for him alone. "Let us start strong," he announced to no one in particular, lifting his paddle with a flourish. The opening bid landed, and he snapped up the next one before the echo faded. Several investors exchanged glances. One leaned toward him. "Grant, you seem unusually eager tonight," he forced a laugh. A leader acts decisively. People respect confidence, but his hand tightened on the paddle. Another bidder stepped in, a man from a well-known San Francisco wine collective. $30,000, the man called out smoothly. Grant lifted his paddle immediately. $35,000. His words tripped slightly at the end. The rival buyer did not flinch. $40,000. A ripple passed through the crowd. Grant raised his paddle again, then hesitated just half a beat too long. $45,000, the rival countered without blinking. $50,000. Grant's jaw tightened. He gave the investors a quick grin. "He thinks he can intimidate me," he muttered. "Not tonight." But I could see the panic in the way he shifted his weight, calculating numbers he could not say out loud. He needed that bottle. Without it, his deal overseas would collapse. and the forged documents would have nowhere to hide. $55,000, he called out. The strain in his voice cracked through the manufactured confidence. The rival bidder paused, then offered a tiny shrug. $60,000. Gasps spread across the room. Grant lifted his paddle halfway, stopped, and lowered it slowly. His investors watched him, waiting for the swagger, the domination, the final blow he always delivered. Nothing came. Grant Maxwell, the man who talked over everyone, had hit the ceiling he could not afford to admit. I watched him swallow hard as silence replaced his bravado, the air tightening around him like a closing fist. Grant stood frozen at $55,000, his paddle hovering uselessly at his side. The auctioneer scanned the room. "Do I hear $56,000?" Silence pressed in, thick and expectant. Eyes shifted toward Grant, waiting for him to reclaim his authority, to prove that this entire performance was still under his control. He did not move. I lifted my paddle. The motion was quiet, almost gentle, but the effect hit the room like a dropped glass. Heads snapped toward me. A whisper rolled across the aisle. Grant's face drained of color before flushing a furious red. The auctioneer blinked. $56,000 from bidder 21. Grant stumbled a half step forward. She cannot bid that," a man behind him murmured. "Why not?" Grant opened his mouth. But no words came out. The rival buyer lifted an eyebrow, amused. "Are you bidding?" Maxwell. Grant lifted his paddle an inch, then lowered it again. He could not go higher, not without exposing money that was never his to spend. The auctioneer raised his gavel. $56,000, going once, going twice. Grant finally choked out. "This is ridiculous," but the gavel fell before he could recover. Sold to bidder 21. A wave of shock rippled through the hall. Someone near the back muttered, "Daisy Caldwell." Seriously, another whispered, "I thought she made assistant wages." Grant swung toward me, eyes wide, breath shallow. "You have no idea what you just did," he hissed under his breath. "I think I do," I replied. He raked a hand through his hair. "You ruined everything." For a moment, I almost felt the weight of his words, almost, because I knew exactly what the bottle represented. Without it, his bribe had no centerpiece. His overseas deal would collapse, and the forged documents he buried under my old reports would have nowhere to hide. His fear confirmed everything I already understood. My bid had shaken him, but the envelope waiting on his table would do far more. When the auction concluded, people lingered in clusters, murmuring about the upset no one had predicted. I did not stay to hear any of it. I thanked the auction staff, signed the purchase documents, and slipped out through the side door before Grant could recover enough to corner me, behind me. I heard his voice rising, brittle and frantic. "Where is she, Daisy? She cannot just walk out." I kept moving. A staff member approached Grant's table a moment later, a young woman with a hesitant expression. She held a sealed envelope. "Mr. Maxwell, this was left for you. The name on it says, 'For Grant Maxwell, from Daisy Caldwell.' She asked us to make sure you received it." Grant snatched the envelope from her hand. "Of course she did," he muttered. Probably some dramatic apology, or a childish attempt at gloating. The investors around him exchanged uneasy glances. He tore it open. At first, he did not react. His eyes skimmed the page once, then again, then a third time as the color drained from his face. "What is this?" he whispered. One of the investors leaned in. "Is something wrong?" Grant jerked the paper away from him. Inside the envelope was not an apology, not a taunt, not a note. It was a court summons, filed under financial fraud, misuse of corporate funds. My evidence attached, my signature included. And at the bottom, the date of issuance set weeks earlier. Grant staggered back a step. She filed this already." The rival bidder from earlier overheard and let out a low exhale. "Looks like she did more homework than you thought." Grant pressed a trembling hand to his forehead. This cannot be happening, but it was because I had never planned for the auction to be the end. I planned for it to be the moment the truth finally walked into the room. The emergency meeting was scheduled for 8 in the morning, and by 8:02, Grant was already shouting. "She forged everything," he barked, slamming a stack of papers onto the conference table. "These numbers are fabricated. Daisy has been trying to undermine me for months." The board members exchanged glances. None of them looked surprised, only tired. I sat at the opposite end of the table. the folder of original documents resting on my lap. If you believe I forged them, I said quietly, we can start by comparing the metadata. Every file was created on your account. That is impossible, Grant snapped. She hacked Marcus Chen, one of the senior board directors. Cut him off. Grant, sit down. We will review this properly. Grant did not sit, but he lowered his voice. She wants my job. That is all this is. I opened the folder. Here is the expense report you submitted on March 2nd, and here is the same document, the version you altered 2 days later. Your edits appear under your login credentials. I slid the papers forward. The signatures do not match either. Board member Lila Morrison frowned. Grant, you told us these were verified by Daisy. I did, Grant said quickly. She approved those numbers, but in April, I replied, you told the same board I was not experienced enough to handle international projections. The room went silent. Marcus leaned forward. Which statement is true, Grant? That she verified the numbers or that she was never qualified to handle them? Grant opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. Nothing coherent came out. The weight of his contradiction settled across the table like a verdict. The board members looked at him with dawning clarity, recognizing the pattern, the manipulation, the desperate lies he could no longer outrun. Grant finally sat down, the fight leaving his shoulders all at once. And for the first time in years, the man who never let me finish a sentence had nothing left to say at all. By the end of the week, Grant's name disappeared from every internal email thread. The board issued a formal announcement he was suspended, barred from accessing any financial systems, and required to appear in court regarding the pending fraud investigation. Investors released their own statement soon after, carefully removing themselves from anything connected to him. I walked through the office the next morning expecting the usual cold nods, the polite silence. Instead, people stopped me in the hallway. Eleanor from accounting touched my arm gently. I always knew you were doing the real work, she whispered. I am glad someone finally said it out loud. Marcus caught me near the elevators. For what it is worth, he said. We should have listened sooner. You carried more than anyone realized. Others did not say anything, they simply gave a small nod when I passed. A quiet acknowledgement that felt heavier than any apology. Grant did not return to the office. His belongings were packed by human resources. Someone said he tried to argue, tried to claim sabotage again, but no one believed him anymore. He had spent years trying to make me invisible. Now he was the one removed from every room. I did not feel triumphant. Relief was not triumph. It was the sound of a long-held breath finally leaving my body. 2 days later, a representative from the Napa Valley Wine Research Institute called. We have followed some of your analytical work, she said. If you are open to it, we would like to discuss a position with significantly more independence than you had at Maxwell and Reinhardt. The offer was real substantial. Others followed. For the first time in years, my future did not feel like something I had to defend. After everything that had happened, everything I had held together in silence, I began to understand that I could finally choose the direction of my own life. Grant stood in front of the judge looking nothing like the man who once filled every room with noise. His suit hung awkwardly, his posture rigid, his confidence erased. The judge read each charge slowly: financial fraud, intentional misrepresentation, misuse of corporate funds. Every sentence landed with the weight of something long overdue. I sat quietly in the back row. My hands stayed still on my lap. I was not here to win anything. I was here to close a chapter I had carried for far too long. When the hearing adjourned, people filed out in a hush. Grant spotted me near the doors and hurried over. Daisy, please, he said, breath uneven. Tell them you misunderstood. You know I never meant for this to happen. I stepped back. Grant, all of this happened because of the choices you made. He shook his head weakly. I can fix this. I just need someone to believe me. You did not lose everything because of me, I said. You lost everything because you believed I did not matter. The words stopped him cold, before he could reach for another excuse. I walked past him and out into the sunlight. Days later, I met with the team from the Napa Valley Wine Research Institute. Their offer was generous, but I surprised myself by turning it down. I had spent years building my voice in the shadows. I did not want to hand it to another company. Instead, I rented a small office near downtown Napa and registered my own wine analytics consultancy. When I told Eleanor, She hugged me so tightly, I laughed. You were meant to lead, she said, not to wait your turn. The first client contract arrived within a week, signed without hesitation. Revenge was never the bottle I bought. Revenge was the woman I finally let myself become. Life lesson. Never believe the people who try to shrink you. Stand long enough, learn quietly if you must. And one day you will step into a life they never imagined you could build. I was fired in under 5 minutes. And it was not for stealing money or breaking a system. It was for pouring the wrong coffee. My phone started buzzing just after 3 in the afternoon. One call, then another. Then 3 more stacked on top of each other. Unknown numbers, a familiar extension. I let them ring. I was sitting at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, watching the screen light up again and again. I already knew what those calls meant. They just did not know it yet. My name is Arya. Until that morning, I worked at a mid-sized logistics firm in Chicago, the kind of company that bragged about efficiency while quietly leaning on the same few people to keep everything running. Just hours earlier, I had been sitting in a conference room across from Ethan Caldwell, the CEO's son. He did not waste time. Your behavior is unacceptable, he said, folding his arms like he was practicing authority in front of a mirror. You used regular office coffee for a VIP client. I blinked once. The machine was empty. I refilled it. That coffee is reserved, he said, for people who matter. HR slid a termination form toward me. Ethan tapped the paper with his finger. This reflects poorly on the company. We are letting you go. Effective immediately. I did not argue. I did not explain that the client had laughed and said it tasted fine. I did not remind them that I had worked there for years without a single warning. I signed where they told me to sign. As I stood, Ethan added, almost casually, we were looking for a reason. I carried my mug with me as I walked out. No one stopped me. No one spoke. The coffee was still warm. Back in my kitchen, the phone kept ringing. Messages stacked up. I took a slow sip and stared at the screen, letting the silence stretch. They were just beginning to understand what walking away actually meant. Author's note. The story you are about to hear is a fictional work created by the writing team at Revenge AITA. While the characters, companies, and events are imagined, the emotions and conflicts reflect real workplace dynamics many people recognize. Each story we tell carries a different message, shaped to explore power, accountability, and quiet forms of justice through narrative. Ethan Caldwell did not invite me to sit. He stayed standing, hands resting on the back of the chair across from me, like he was already rehearsing how this would end. Your behavior is unacceptable, he said. He spoke slowly. Each word clipped, practiced. We have standards here, professional standards. I looked at him, waiting for something that made sense. You poured regular office coffee for a VIP client. He continued. That reflects a lack of judgment. I refilled the machine, I said. The client was already there. That is not the point, Ethan replied. His voice sharpened. The point is perception. Linda from Human Resources cleared her throat. She slid a thin folder across the table without meeting my eyes. We documented the incident, she said quietly. There are protocols. Protocols, Ethan echoed, nodding. People need to understand their place. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I kept my voice even. I have never had a warning. Not once. That is true, Linda said. Your performance reviews have been consistently strong. Ethan turned to her, irritation flashing across his face. This is not about performance. This is about culture. He looked back at me. You don't get to decide what is acceptable here. I thought about the late nights, the emergency calls, the systems I kept alive while everyone else slept. I said none of it. Linda pushed the termination form closer. Effective immediately, she said. You will receive your final paycheck in the next pay cycle. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. Ethan leaned forward. For what it's worth. Arya. This didn't have to be complicated. I signed my name. As I stood, he added, almost as an afterthought, we were looking for a reason. The words landed harder than the accusation. Coffee was just the excuse. Authority was the point. Linda gathered the papers. Security will walk you out. That won't be necessary, I said. I picked up my mug, still half full, and turned toward the door. No one tried to stop me. I packed my desk without asking for a box. No one offered one anyway. My keyboard sat where I left it, still plugged in. The monitor blinked with a locked screen. My username frozen at the top. I reached out, then stopped myself. There was no reason to touch it now. "Arya," someone said behind me. I turned. It was Mark from operations. We had worked together for years. He shifted his weight and lowered his voice. "I didn't know they were going to do that." "I know," I said. He nodded, relief flickering across his face like I had given him permission to stay silent. "If you need a reference, I'm fine," I said. And I meant it, even if I did not fully understand why yet. Across the room, two people pretended to be deep in conversation. Another stared at her screen like it might disappear if she looked away. No one met my eyes for long. It was easier that way. Linda from HR appeared near the aisle. "Security is on their way." "They won't need to be," I said. She hesitated. "Company policy." "I'm leaving," I said, lifting my mug. That was the policy. She stepped aside. As I slid my notebook into my bag, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A system alert, muted but familiar. A background process pinging for confirmation. My name was still attached to it. So were several others. No one else here could approve those requests. I had set it up that way. Back when speed mattered more than redundancy, and I was told not to overcomplicate things. "Arya," Mark said again. Quieter this time. "They'll figure it out." I gave him a small smile. Eventually, I walked toward the elevators. Coffee warm in my hand, my pulse finally slowing. I did not feel defiant. I felt steady. Whatever happened next would not be loud. It would not be dramatic. It would simply begin when I stopped holding everything together. I opened my personal laptop at the kitchen table and waited for it to boot, the way I always did. Patient and methodical. My phone buzzed again. I set it face down. The login screen appeared. Muscle memory carried my fingers. My credentials still worked. I exhaled slowly. Of course they didn't revoke it. I clicked through the admin panel, not rushing. Each confirmation loaded cleanly. Root access, deployment keys, authentication tokens, all of it traced back to one profile, mine. I scrolled through the access list and felt something settle in my chest. I had meant to transfer root months ago. I had asked for approval to set up a secondary admin, to document dependencies, to train someone as backup. We don't need to waste budget on redundancy. Ethan had said then, everything is running fine. Everything was running because I checked the documentation folder. Empty, except for a few outdated diagrams I had saved on my own time. The rest lived in my head. That had been the expectation. Be fast, be quiet, make it work. I picked up my phone and called Amanda, the attorney who had reviewed my contract when they converted me from contractor to employee. "They fired me," I said. "For what reason?" she asked. "Coffee," I said, effective immediately. There was a pause. "Did they terminate you in writing?" "Yes." "Then you no longer have any obligation to maintain access or availability," she said. "Your contract covers work performed during employment, past tense. I'm still listed as the primary administrator. That is their oversight," Amanda said. "Keeping access after termination creates risk for you. Revoking it is standard security practice." I closed my eyes. "I'm not touching data. I'm not deleting anything." "You don't need to," she said. "You're simply stepping away." I ended the call and looked back at the screen. My name sat at the center of everything they depended on. Not because I wanted power, because they never bothered to take responsibility for it. I took a sip of coffee, set the mug down carefully, and moved my cursor to the access controls. I did not rush. I opened the access control panel and read through it one last time, the way I always did before making any change. My name appeared everywhere it mattered. Primary administrator. Final approval. Emergency override. I heard Amanda's voice in my head. Revoking access is standard security practice. I clicked into my profile. Confirm identity. The system prompted. I confirmed. First, I removed administrative privileges. The screen refreshed without protest. Then I revoked my own user credentials, the same way I would have done for anyone leaving the company. No exceptions, no shortcuts. My phone vibrated again. I ignored it. I disabled the authentication bridge that depended on my profile. Not deleted, not corrupted, simply inactive. The system logged each action automatically, time-stamped, orderly, 90 seconds. That was all it took. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen, waiting for something dramatic to happen. Nothing did. No alarms, no flashing warnings, just quiet. I logged out. The laptop fan softened, like it was relieved. I closed it and set it aside. Only then did I pick up my coffee again. It had cooled slightly, but it still tasted the same. At 5 minutes past 5, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Another call followed, then another. I watched the screen light up, then darken again. A text came through from Mark. Systems are acting strange. Did you hear anything? I typed back. I'm not there anymore. The phone rang again. This time, I recognized the extension. I did not answer. I sat there, coffee warming my hands, listening to the quiet stretch. Somewhere across the city, screens were freezing, requests were timing out. People were repeating the same commands, louder each time, as if volume could fix what access controlled. I took another sip and waited. I answered the call on the 4th ring. "Area," Ethan said, his voice bright in a way that felt rehearsed. "Hey, there you are." I did not respond. "So," he continued, forcing a laugh. "Funny thing. Earlier today got a little out of hand. Office culture, you know how it is. Someone took things too seriously. You fired me." I said, "Yes." But he rushed the word. "That was never meant to stick. It was a prank. A joke that went too far." I lifted my mug and took a slow sip. "You had human resources prepare paperwork." "Well, yes, that was part of the bit," he said. "We wanted to see how you'd react." I reacted by leaving. I said. There was a pause. I could hear voices behind him now. Low and tense. "Right," Ethan said. "And that's fine. Totally fine. But now that everyone's cooled down, we'd love for you to come back." Same role, no hard feelings. "I'm not interested," I said. His laugh came sharper this time. "Area? Let's be reasonable. We can adjust compensation." I didn't mention money. "Of course not," he said quickly. "But we can offer a raise, 20%, 30. Whatever makes this easier." I set the mug down. "You called this a prank." "Yes, and now you're negotiating," I said. Another voice cut in behind him, muffled but urgent. Ethan turned away from the phone for a second, then came back quieter. "There's been a technical issue," he said. "Some systems are lagging, probably unrelated, but it would help if you logged in and took a look." "I can't," I said. "You can't." His voice tightened. "Why not? I don't work there," I said, "and I no longer have access." The silence stretched. When he spoke again, the friendliness was gone. "What did you do?" "Arya, I followed standard procedure," I said. After termination, his breath hitched. "You need to fix this." I picked up my coffee again. "No," I said, "I don't." The line stayed open, filled with breathing that no longer sounded confident at all. The next call came from an internal number I didn't recognize. "This is Dana from IT," a woman said, speaking fast. "We're locked out of several core services. The routing queues aren't updating, and authentication keeps failing. I don't work there anymore," I said. There was a sharp inhale. "Arya, please. We just need you to log in and tell us what you see." "I can't," I said. "I'm no longer employed." The line went dead. It rang again almost immediately. "Human resources," Linda said, her voice thinner than it had been that morning. "We may have moved too quickly. There's talk of revisiting your termination." "I don't work there anymore," I said. She hesitated. "Operations is reporting stalled orders. Trucks are waiting at docks. Clients are calling." "I understand," I said. "I still don't work there." Another call broke through before she could respond. "Arya. This is Paul from operations," a man said, skipping introductions. "We have 300 shipments frozen in the system. People on the floor are panicking." "I don't work there anymore," I said. "You can't just walk away," he snapped. "You're costing people their jobs." I closed my eyes. I was fired. Effective immediately. "That was a mistake," he said. "Everyone makes mistakes." "Not everyone," I said. "Puts them in writing." The phone buzzed again. A voicemail notification stacked on top of another, then a text. "We are prepared to offer consulting rates. $1,000 per hour. Please call." I set the phone down without replying. A few minutes later, it rang again. Ethan's number lit the screen, then disappeared. The silence between calls grew heavier, like the pause before something finally breaks. I took a sip of coffee and waited, letting the unanswered calls pile up. The call came from a private number. I answered it without speaking. This is Daniel Caldwell, a man said. His voice was steady, practiced. I'm calling to apologize. I waited. What happened today should not have happened. He continued. I've reviewed the situation. I understand now that mistakes were made. Mistakes were documented. I said. Yes, he said. And they were unacceptable. I want to make this right. He did not rush. He sounded like someone choosing words carefully, aware they might be his last chance. We would like to offer you a new position, Daniel said. Chief Technology Officer. Full authority over systems and hiring. A base salary of $200,000. Equity. Direct access to me. I set my mug down. You fired me over coffee. There was a pause. That was not my decision, but it was your company, I said. We can correct the culture, he said. That starts with giving you the authority you deserved. Authority wasn't the problem, I said. I already had responsibility. What I didn't have was respect. He exhaled slowly. Arya, we value what you built. You valued it after it stopped working, I said. Silence filled the line. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. What would it take for you to come back? I thought of the conference room, of the paperwork prepared in advance, of being told who mattered and who did not. It would take a company that listens before things break, I said. One that treats infrastructure as an investment, not a convenience. One that does not turn people into lessons. We can change, Daniel said, not fast enough. I said. He did not argue, he did not threaten. He simply stayed quiet, as if absorbing the weight of the answer. I understand, he said finally. I am sorry it took this to see it. I believe you, I said. That doesn't change anything. The line went silent before it disconnected. I picked up my coffee again, steady in my hands. The company did not fall apart all at once. It thinned, quietly. Mark called me 3 days later. They lost 2 clients this morning, he said, not small ones. I'm sorry, I said. I don't think anyone else is, he replied. They're blaming the systems. Then they're blaming each other. By the end of the week, recruiters stopped calling people from that office. Internal postings went unanswered. A role they had once filled in days stayed open for weeks. Linda from Human Resources emailed me from her personal address. There's an internal review, she wrote. They're auditing the termination process. I did not reply. Ethan Caldwell disappeared from the company directory without announcement. No farewell email, no title change. Just gone from meetings, gone from decisions. Someone told Mark he was still employed, technically, but no longer allowed to approve anything that mattered. Consultants arrived. Then more consultants. They asked for documentation that did not exist and access that no one could grant. Progress reports turned into revised timelines. Revised timelines turned into excuses. A month later, I met Julia, a director at another firm, over coffee. She did not ask why I left. She asked what I wanted to build. We invest before things break. She said, that's non-negotiable. I started the following Monday. Mark sent one last message a few weeks after that. They're still trying to rebuild. It's slow, expensive. I read it, then set my phone aside. I did not feel triumphant. I felt clear. What happened was not revenge. It was gravity. A company that treated people as replaceable eventually learned which ones were not. I finished my coffee and went back to work. 3 months later, no one asked me to justify my presence. Morning, Arya, Julia said as she passed my desk. Coffee already in hand. The integration report you sent last night cleared legal. Clean work. Thanks, I said. She paused. We're approving the redundancy budget you flagged. Hire whoever you need. That was it. No debate, no warnings about cost. She walked on, trusting the answer she had already accepted. I was refilling my mug when I saw him. Ethan Caldwell stood near the elevator bank, badge clipped to his belt, waiting with a group from another firm. He looked thinner somehow, quieter. No one deferred to him. No one laughed at anything he said. He noticed me and hesitated. Then he stepped closer. Arya, he said. His voice was careful now. I heard you landed well. I did, I said. I wanted to say. He started, then stopped. Things changed after you left. I know, I said. He nodded, eyes dropping to the mug in my hand. Coffee's good here, it's coffee, I said. I drink what I want. He gave a short, humorless smile. Right. The elevator arrived. He stepped inside without another word. The doors closed gently, like nothing had ever slammed at all. Later that afternoon, one of the junior engineers stopped by my desk. "Hey," she said, a little nervous. "I tried the deployment sequence you showed me. It worked." "Good," I said. "You did it right," she smiled. Relief bright and unguarded. "Thanks for taking the time." When the office quieted, I finished my coffee and rinsed the mug myself. No signs, no labels, no rules about who deserved what. Power, I had learned, was never about who could fire someone over a cup of coffee. It was about knowing who kept the company standing and choosing to treat them like they mattered.